Somalis are an ethnic group inhabiting the Horn of Africa. The overwhelming majority of Somalis speak the Somali language, which is part of the Kurdic branch of the Afro-Asiatic family. They are predominantly Sunni Muslim. Ethnic Somalis number around 16 to 20 million and are principally concentrated in Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti, with many also residing in parts of the Middle East, North America and Europe. Etymology. Ir Samala, the oldest common ancestor of several Somali clans, is generally regarded as the source of the ethnonym Somali. The name Somali is, in turn, held to be derived from the words Su and Mal, which together mean go and milk, a reference to the ubiquitous pastoralism of the Somali people. Another plausible etymology proposes that the term Somali is derived from the Arabic for wealthy, again referring to Somali rich as in livestock. An ancient Chinese document from the 9th century referred to the northern Somali coast, which was then called Berbera by Arab geographers in reference to the region's Berber inhabitants, as Popali. The first clear written reference of the sobriquet Somali, however, dates back to the 15th century. During the wars between the Sultanate of Ifat based at Zila and the Solomonic dynasty, the Abyssinian emperor had one of his court officials compose a hymn celebrating a military victory over the Sultan of Ifat's eponymous troops. History. Ancient rock paintings in Somalia which date back to 5,000 years have been found in the northern part of the country, depicting early life in the territory. The most famous of these is the La's Gil complex, which contains some of the earliest known rock art on the African continent and features many elaborate pastoralist sketches of animal and human figures. In other places, such as the northern Dumbalan region, a depiction of a man on a horse is postulated as being one of the earliest known examples of a mounted huntsman. During the Stone Age, the Dune culture and the Hargesan culture flourished here with their respective industries and factories. The oldest evidence of burial customs in the Horn of Africa comes from cemeteries in Somalia dating back to 4th millennium BC. The stone implements from the Jalelo site in northern Somalia are said to be the most important link in evidence of the universality in Paleolithic times between the East and the West. In antiquity, the ancestors of the Somali people were an important link in the Horn of Africa, connecting the region's commerce with the rest of the ancient world. Somali sailors and merchants were the main suppliers of frankincense, myrrh and spices, items which were considered valuable luxuries by the ancient Egyptians, Phoenicians, Mycenaeans and Babylonians. According to most scholars, the ancient land of Punt and its inhabitants formed part of the ethnogenesis of the Somali people. The ancient Puntites were a nation of people that had close relations with pharaonic Egypt during the times of Pharaoh Sahuri and Queen Hatshepsut. The pyramidal structures, temples and ancient houses of dressed stone littered around Somalia are said to date from this period. In the Classical era, several ancient city-states such as Opone, Essina, Sarapian, Nikon, Malaro, Damo and Mosolon near Cape Gadafui, which competed with the Sabians, Parthians and Axumites for the wealthy Indo-Greco-Roman trade, also flourished in Somalia. The birth of Islam on the opposite side of Somalia's Red Sea coast meant that Somali merchants, sailors and expatriates living in the Arabian Peninsula gradually came under the influence of the new religion through their converted Arab-Muslim trading partners. With the migration of fleeing Muslim families from the Islamic world to Somalia in the early centuries of Islam and the peaceful conversion of the Somali population by Somali Muslim scholars in the following centuries, the city of Mogadishu came to be known as the City of Islam, and controlled the East African gold trade for several centuries. The Sultanate of Ifat, led by the Wal-Ashma dynasty with its capital at Zila, ruled over parts of what is now eastern Ethiopia, Djibouti, and northern Somalia. The historian Al-Omari records that Ifat was situated near the Red Sea coast, and states its size as 15 days' travel by 20 days' travel. Its army numbered 15,000 horsemen and 20,000 foot soldiers. Al-Omari also credits Ifat with 7 mother cities: Belkulza, Kuldura, Shimi, Shelwa, Adal, Jammer and Labu. In the Middle Ages, several powerful Somali empires dominated the regional trade, including the Ajuran Sultanate, which excelled in hydraulic engineering and fortress building, the Sultanate of Adal, whose general Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi was the first commander to use cannon warfare on the continent during Adal's conquest of the Ethiopian Empire, and the Sultanate of the Gelidi, whose military dominance forced governors of the Omani Empire north of the city of Lamu to pay tribute to the Somali Sultan Ahmed Yusuf. In the late 19th century, after the Berlin Conference had ended, European empires sailed with their armies to the Horn of Africa. The imperial clouds wavering over Somalia alarmed the dervish leader Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, who gathered Somali soldiers from across the Horn of Africa and began one of the longest anti-colonial wars ever. The dervish state successfully repulsed the British Empire 4 times and forced it to retreat to the coastal region. As a result of its successes against the British, the dervish state received support from the Ottoman and German empires. The Turks also named Hassan emir of the Somali nation, and the Germans promised to officially recognize any territories the dervishes were to acquire. After a quarter of a century of holding the British at bay, the dervishes were finally defeated in 1920, when Britain for the first time in Africa used airplanes to bomb the dervish capital of Taliek. As a result of this bombardment, former dervish territories were turned into a protectorate of Britain. Italy similarly faced the same opposition from Somali sultans and armies and did not acquire full control of parts of modern Somalia until the fascist era in late 1927. This occupation lasted till 1941 and was replaced by a British military administration. Following World War II, Britain retained control of both British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland as protectorates. In 1945, during the Potsdam Conference, the United Nations granted Italy trusteeship of Italian Somaliland, but only under close supervision and on the condition, first proposed by the Somali Youth League and other nascent Somali political organizations, such as Hizbiyya Dijal My Rifle Somali and the Somali National League, that Somalia achieve independence within 10 years. British Somaliland remained a protectorate of Britain until 1960, to the extent that Italy held the territory by UN mandate. The trusteeship provisions gave the Somalis the opportunity to gain experience in political education and self-government. These were advantages that British Somaliland, which was to be incorporated into the new Somali state, did not have. Although in the 1950s British colonial officials attempted, through various administrative development efforts, to make up for past neglect, the protectorate stagnated. The disparity between the two territories in economic development and political experience would cause serious difficulties when it came time to integrate the two parts. Meanwhile, in 1948, under pressure from their World War II allies and to the dismay of the Somalis, the British returned the Horde and the Ogaden to Ethiopia, based on a treaty they signed in 1897 in which the British ceded Somali territory to the Ethiopian Emperor Menelik in exchange for his help against plundering by Somali clans. Britain included the proviso that the Somali nomads would retain their autonomy, but Ethiopia immediately claimed sovereignty over them. This prompted an unsuccessful bid by Britain in 1956 to buy back the Somali lands it had turned over. Britain also granted administration of the almost exclusively Somali-inhabited northern frontier district to Kenyan nationalists despite an informal plebiscite demonstrating the overwhelming desire of the region's population to join the newly formed Somali Republic. A referendum was held in neighboring Djibouti in 1958, on the eve of Somalia's independence in 1960, to decide whether or not to join the Somali Republic or to remain with France. The referendum turned out in favor of a continued association with France, largely due to a combined yes vote by the sizable Afar ethnic group and resident Europeans. There was also widespread vote rigging, with the French expelling thousands of Somalis before the referendum reached the polls. The majority of those who voted no were Somalis who were strongly in favor of joining a united Somalia, as had been proposed by Mahmoud Harbour, vice president of the Government Council. Harbour was killed in a plane crash 2 years later. Djibouti finally gained its independence from France in 1977, and Hassan Guld Attribution, a Somali who had campaigned for a yes vote in the referendum of 1958, eventually wound up as Djibouti's first president. British Somaliland became independent on 26 June 1960 as the State of Somaliland, and the Trust Territory of Somalia followed suit 5 days later. On 1 July 1960, the two territories united to form the Somali Republic, albeit within boundaries drawn up by Italy and Britain. A government was formed by Abdullahi Issa Muhammad and Muhammad Haji Ibrahim Eagle, other members of the trusteeship and protectorate governments, with Haji Bashir Ismail Yusuf as president of the Somali National Assembly, Aden Abdullah Osman Dar as the president of the Somali Republic, and Abdurrashid Ali Shamaka as prime minister. On 20 July 1961, and through a popular referendum, the people of Somalia ratified a new constitution, which was first drafted in 1960. In 1967, Muhammad Haji Ibrahim Eagle became Prime Minister, a position to which he was appointed by Shamaka. Eagle would later become the President of the autonomous Somaliland region in northwestern Somalia. On 15 October 1969, while paying a visit to the northern town of Lasanad, Somalia's then President Abdurrashid Ali Shamaka was shot dead by one of his own bodyguards. His assassination was quickly followed by a military coup d'état on 21 October 1969, in which the Somali army seized power without encountering armed opposition, essentially a bloodless takeover. The putsch was spearheaded by Major General Mohammed Siad Barre, who at the time commanded the army. Alongside Barre, the Supreme Revolutionary Council that assumed power after President Shamak's assassination was led by Lieutenant Colonel Salad Gabi Rikedia, and Chief of Police Jamer Korshel. The SRC subsequently renamed the country the Somali Democratic Republic, dissolved the parliament and the Supreme Court, and suspended the constitution. The Revolutionary Army established large-scale public works programs and successfully implemented an urban and rural literacy campaign, which helped dramatically increase the literacy rate. In addition to a nationalization program of industry and land, the new regime's foreign policy placed an emphasis on Somalia's traditional and religious links with the Arab world, eventually joining the Arab League in 1974. That same year, Barre also served as chairman of the Organization of African Unity, the predecessor of the African Union. Pan-Somalism. Somali people in the Horn of Africa are divided among different countries that were artificially and some might say arbitrarily partitioned by the former imperial powers. Pan-Somalism is an ideology that advocates the unification of all ethnic Somalis once part of Somali empires such as the Ajuran Empire, the Adil Sultanate, the Gabroon dynasty and the Dervish state under one flag and one nation. The Siad Barre regime actively promoted Pan-Somalism, which eventually led to the Ogaden War between Somalia on one side, and Ethiopia, Cuba and the Soviet Union on the other. Notable Pan-Somalists: Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, Somali nationalist and religious leader and that established the Dervish state during the scramble for Africa. Muhammad Ali Shah, 26th Sultan of the Warsang Ali Sultanate. Hasna Dore, early 20th century Somali female commander of the dervish state that frequently joined battles against the imperial powers during the scramble for Africa. Hawa Tako, early 20th century Somali female nationalist whose sacrifice became a symbol for pan-Somalism. Bashir Yusuf, Somali nationalist and religious leader. Abdullah Isa, first Prime Minister of Somalia. Aden Abdullah Osman Dar, first President of Somalia. Abdurrashid Ali Shamaka, second President of Somalia. Siad Barre, third President of Somalia. Jama Korshel, Somali National Army General, former head of Somali Police, and commander in the Supreme Revolutionary Council. Daud Abdul Hersha, prominent Somali general considered the father of the Somali military. Mahmoud Harba, active pan-Somalist that came close to uniting Djibouti with Somalia in the 1970s. Salad Gabi Rakedia, major general in the Somali military and a revolutionary. Haji Diary Hersha, Somali businessman actively supporting pan-Somalist aspirations in the 1950s. Abdurazak Haji Hussein, former Prime Minister of Somalia and Somali Youth League leader. Sheikh Mukhtar Mohammed Hussein, Speaker of Parliament, from 1965 to 1969 and interim President of Somalia before the coup d'état in 1969. Abdullahi Ahmed Daro, General in the Somali National Army, established the National Academy for Strategy. Ali Matan Hashi, Brigadier General and politician, first Somali Air Force pilot, the father of Somali Air Force and a prominent member of the Supreme Revolutionary Council. Abdurrahman Jama Barre, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Finance of Somalia. Haji Bashir Ismail Yusuf, first President of the Somali National Assembly and prominent Somali Youth League member. Osman Haji Mohammed, prominent Somali Youth League member and parliamentarian. Abdullahi Yusuf Ahmed, President of Somalia, Colonel in Somali National Army, and commander during Ogaden campaign.